All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our today's session. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all from around the world that join us today on this exciting session. So, my name is Arash Agajani, and I will be your host today for this session. Uh, actually, I'm a technical architect from Vancouver, Canada, and I'm leading the Power Platform Zero to Hero community with my friend Dija. Uh, and today, I'm thrilled to introduce our special guest speaker today, Nati. Nati is Microsoft MVP and Power Platform lead solution architect at CarePoint 365. So we are so happy and fortunate that we have Nati in our today's session. So first of all, I'm going to introduce a little about the Power Platform Zero to Hero community and the Microsoft Learn, and then I will actually join the Nati to our stage to start or kick off this today's session. So here, Microsoft Learn and the Microsoft Learn community. Microsoft Learn is a wonderful learning space that we interact, with every day. When you are looking to learn a topic about Microsoft product, the first site you refer to is Microsoft Learn, a site full of useful and updated information to learn and improve your knowledge, from specialized guideline to certificate and exam. Everything is in Microsoft Learn. So in Microsoft Learn, in addition to information and educational content, there are also a great tech community. The Microsoft Learn community is a platform where actually learners can network with peers and experts, access updated and discussion via the Learn Hub, and enhance skills through interactive learning rooms in a diverse and inclusive setting. So Power Platform Zero to Hero is also one of the Microsoft Learn's community learning room, which has more than 1,500 members. If you are not a member of our tech community, join actually from this link here, and I put it in the screen. So aka.ms/power platform 0 to hero. So as you may know, currently Microsoft Learn hosts a challenge. It's a build edition of the Microsoft Learn challenge. It's started from May 21st and will be continued to the June 21st. So actually immerse yourself in cutting edge AI technology and earn a badge by completing one of these unique AI focused collection: Azure AI, Microsoft Fabric, GitHub Copilot, Copilot for M365, and Copilot Studio are the topics that cover in this challenge. So each challenge offers a variety of resources designed to expand your skill set and empower your career. So register now today through this link, aka.ms/msbuild-challenge. So it was a quick introduction for our community and the Microsoft Build challenge. So before we begin, a few important notes here. If you have any question during the presentation, feel free to type them in the chat box. We will have a dedicated Q&A session towards at the end. And this session is being recorded for those who couldn't join us live and will be available shortly in Power Platform Zero to Hero YouTube channel. Okay, so that's all, and we are looking forward to gaining valuable insight from you, Nati. So without any delay, I will hand it over to you to start your presentation. So let me add Nati here to our stage. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Yeah, super
Nice to
excited.
meet
Thank you for
you, and
having me.
thank you for joining us today. So
Yeah.
I'm excited for this today topic. So I'm a Power Platform consultant, and I'm working with the Power Platform solution. So I'm excited to learn about the security concept, and anything related to the security, and the Power Platform environment. So The stage on yours, so you can start your presentation. If you would like, to share your presentation here, I can add it to the stage.
Let me share my presentation now. There we go.
Okay.
Fantastic. Can you see it? Awesome.
Okay.
So I always put a disclaimer around certain presentations that I do. My usual go-to when it comes to prepping for these presentations is my wife. And when I went to her with the session saying, look what I've built, do you understand it? Does it make sense? Does it look good? She just gave me a dead blank look. Like, are you serious? Is this the nerdiness level that you're going to? So she made me put a disclaimer in saying this presentation is heavily focused on Power Platform and the Avengers. So viewer discretion is advised. Best of luck.
Awesome.
Jumping straight into it.
Okay.
Yeah, jumping straight into it. We're looking at our Power Platform security back to basics, or the Infinity Stones of security. The idea is Power Platform security is often looked at as over complex, and it's also sometimes overlooked when designing solutions. So the idea of today is to kind of set the foundation, understand the fundamentals and the basics of how to really build a fantastic security model with ease. Often when you look at security models, you see really, really complex and scary diagrams online. So hopefully by the end of this deck, we'll have gone through quite a few fundamentals, a few topics, and we would have produced a really simple and robust security model without scaring people away. But before we jump into it, my name is Nati. I'm currently a solutions architect at Carefront 365. I'm actually originally from South Africa. I made the move to rainy Manchester in December, and it's fantastic to be here. The Manchester community has been very, very warm and welcoming to me, so it's definitely been worth the move. And I just enjoy giving back to the community. I myself learned from various community members, and that's how I grew my career. So it's fantastic to just give back. And also, lastly, just a quick thank you to the Power Platform Zero to Hero team and Arash for making this happen. Thank you so much for inviting me on, having it on a Wednesday, not on a Saturday, due to the busyness of this week. So I'm super excited to be here. Yeah, hope you guys enjoy. The idea of today's session is to kind of tackle 6 major areas within Power Platform security. We'll be looking at users, how we get them into our environment, how we prevent them from gaining access to an environment, as that's the kind of the first blocker to locking up our data and our solutions. The next bit we're going to be looking at is business units, teams, and security roles. I like to kind of group those into 3 because I call them the triple threat. Those 3 items used together are fantastic. So we'll understand data segmentation, we'll understand memberships through teams and record ownership, and then we will also see how we can streamline that through security roles and privileges. Kind of branching off of the triple threat, we also look at record ownership in terms of who owns what within a Power Platform environment, who can see what, who can access what, etc. And then lastly, we're going to extend our data model into hierarchy models. So if you've ever seen things like your organogram in Microsoft Teams, we'll be working with something very similar to that to kind of make a really, really robust security data model. So let's dive into the first item on our list, and that's going to be enabling users within our environment. When we are prompted when creating a new environment, we're prompted with the option to assign an environment security group to that environment. And often I've seen a lot of developers skip this piece. I am very, very adamant that this is your starting point for Power Platform security. The idea is you create an Entra ID security group, you assign members to it, and then you relate that security group to an environment. And ultimately that defines who has then got access to your environment. So if we look at this picture over here, we've got our Entra ID security groups all the way at the top, and we've got a standard three-tier or 3-stage environment strategy, whatever you want to call it. We've got our dev environment, our testing environment, and our production environment. Now, obviously, we don't want to open these environments up to anyone within the company. The last thing you want is end users logging into a dev environment by mistake and causing a bunch of havoc there. So that's where security groups really become beneficial, with streamlining and optimizing how we manage users in an environment. Obviously, we can add them manually, but if we go through security groups, we centralize it through AAD anyways. So if we create, for example, a security group for our development team, we can assign that development security group to our dev environment. And that means members part of that security group, such as our little figurines over here, Captain America, Bucky Barnes, and Falcon, these guys will then be able to access our development environment. And the same thing applies for our test environment and our production environment. Users are part of those security groups would then gain access to these environments. So that's what I like to say is the starting point of our security journey. That's our first blocker in the road to say who has got access to our environment, and we can then start giving a bit more information, a bit more access once you've got people in there. One of the frustrations, however, about using Entra ID security groups within Power Platform, and I'm sure many people share the same frustration, is that provisioning times can be pretty lengthy. I've noticed it sometimes up to a day to kind of provision updates in the security group. So the last thing that we want is for us to add, say, a new user to a security group, wait a couple of hours for them to show up in our environment, and then gain access to the areas or to certain apps, etc. So that's why I like to use the force sync user action. This action can be used directly in Power Automate through the Power Platform admins connector, or can be used as an FX formula in Power Apps, again with the Power Platform admin connector. And basically what this action does, it says when a user is added to an environment, we can then retrieve what that user's Azure object ID is. We can then trigger this action to say, okay, we're going to be force syncing this user in our Avengers environment. Our object ID is from Azure, and it's going to forcefully push that user into our environment, into the users table. So if you've all played around in environments, we've got the default system users table. That's a list of users that have got access to our environment. And that's what the force sync user action is going to be doing. It's going to be pushing the people from that new security group based on their Azure ID into our environment. And this is something that, again, we'll use a bit later on in the presentation when we're talking about more security groups. But I find that it helps optimize and kind of streamline the efficiency of ensuring users are added to an environment as soon as possible. It can still take up to an hour at times, unfortunately. But at least you're putting in a force measure to say, great, this user's been added. Let's add them to the environment, and voila, we can now start assigning security roles, we can start assigning data, etc., and continue with our security journey. So now that we've got users in our environment, being that we've driven them through environment security groups, and we have, oh gosh, my mouse is, oh look, you can do that. We've driven them through environment security groups, and now we've force synced them into our environment. Let's talk about business units and how we start to segment data. So when we spin up an environment, we automatically get a default parent business unit, and that's usually prefix org 123, whatever it is, with a bunch of numbers and letters in it. Best practice, obviously, is to rename it to something practical that's going to represent that business unit in that environment. But you've also got the ability to add additional business units. And if we look at our diagram over here, again, based off the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe approach, we've got our MCU being the core business unit within our environment. And then we've got child business units falling under the MCU business unit. We've got one for Midgard, which is one of the realms. We've got Asgard, and we've got the Dynasty. Now, for each of these business units, it may look like we've got 3 different tables. We've got a heroes table, a weapons table, and a threats table falling under each business unit. We don't necessarily have 3 different tables per business unit, but rather within each of these tables, we've got a column. We've got our standard owner column, and we've got our owning business unit column. And based on the business unit that a user falls under, say a user falls under the Midgard business unit and they create a record, the record within the heroes table would be then assigned and owned by the Midgard business unit. So if we look at a record created by a user within Midgard and we look at the owning business unit column for that record in that table, you'll see it's going to be Midgard. So we're not necessarily creating data in different tables, but we're assigning to different areas of a company based on business unit segmentation. And if we approach it from this perspective, where we've got Dr. Strange who wants to add the eye gauntlet to his weapons table, he forms part of the Dynasty business unit team. So our user, Dr. Strange, forms part of that. He's got the Dynasty business unit assigned to him. When he creates this record, we've potentially got 3 ways how this record could be owned. We've got the first way saying, well, Dr. Strange created it, therefore the record belongs to him. And because he forms part of the Dynasty business unit, therefore the record is owned by the Dynasty business unit. The other option is to say, okay, this is an org-owned record, so we can assign it to either the business unit, the Dynasty, or to the MCU as a whole, saying the owning business unit is the entire organization. And then lastly, we can also assign it to a team, which we'll get into a bit later on, or actually in the next slide. So being that Dr. Strange forms part of the Sorcerer Supreme team, we've got the Sorcerer Supreme there, we've got Wong there, Dr. Strange. We could then assign this gauntlet to that team. The team would become the owner of the record, but again, because that team falls under the Dynasty business unit, the owning record for that, the owning business unit for this gauntlet record that we've created would be the Dynasty. And that means if we've got a security role that says, okay, you can only see data within your business unit, users within our Asgard business unit over here wouldn't be able to see this record if it belongs to the Dynasty, and vice versa. They wouldn't be able to see records that belong to the Asgard business unit. So that's kind of our introduction into how we can segment data from business units, very high level understanding. And I did mention at the beginning of this, we call it the triple threat. So we'll see how this all ties in together with teams and security roles shortly. The next items we're going to touch on are teams, teams specifically within Dataverse, not teams as in Microsoft Teams. When we are kind of building a security model, we can streamline how we manage users and how we can control record ownership through teams. We can kind of group people into group of people, basically. We've got 3 main types of Dataverse teams. We've got our ownership team, our access team, and Intra ID teams. The Intra ID splits into 2, which we'll cover shortly. The ownership team basically says, if you're a member and you're part of this ownership team, you have then got access to records that team owns. So again, if we look at our previous diagram over here, where Wong, Dr. Strange, and the Sorcerer Supreme form part of a team within the Dynasty business unit, if Dr. Strange created the record over here and he assigned it to this team, because the Sorcerer Supreme and Wong are still a part of that same ownership team, that have access to that record as well. And one of the nice things about ownership teams is that we can assign security roles to an ownership team, meaning that users that form part of, that are members of this team, then inherit those security roles. You don't have to go manually assign security roles to each individual. They can inherit the security roles assigned to the ownership team. And moreover, we can actually assign ownership teams to various business units. If you wanted to create an ownership team on the core business unit or within a specific business unit for, say, Dynasty or Asgard, we can definitely do that as well. And this team would be our Dynasty business unit team with those members, the 3 members, Dr. Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme, and Wong. And because we've assigned a record to that, they'll then be able to view that record based on the roles they've inherited from that team. Access teams are slightly different. I don't want to get too much into it because from my experience, we tend to go down a very, very dark rabbit hole with them. Access teams work slightly different. You can create it again. You can have members part of that team, but we rely on the members to have their own security roles. So users, we can't assign security roles to an access team. And if a user needs to access records, part of that team, when we assign a record to that team, we need to ensure that they've got a security role that gives them access to that data. It gets a lot more, not complicated, but a lot more detailed because we can start using access teams for column profile securities, which is another topic we're not going to cover today because that extends a bit further. But it's still a very, very powerful way of structuring how users access data within your environment. One of my favorite teams, and I tend to use them a fortune these days, are Intra ID teams. And these kind of split into 2, as I mentioned. We've got our security group teams and we've got our Office 365 group teams. Basically, we can just define what platform we're connecting to. Are we connecting to standard O365 teams, security groups, not security groups, or we're going to connect to actual Intra ID security groups. Now, what Intra ID teams allow us to do is we can create an Entra ID team, assign it to a security group, be it O365 or Entra ID security, and we can determine if you're going to be pulling the members, the owners, the members and guests from that group. We can also then assign security roles to an Entra ID team. So if we were to create an Entra ID team saying this is going to be our Sorcerer Supreme team, we've then got an Azure or call it an Entra ID security group called the Sorcerer Supreme, and that consists of our three members, Dr. Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme, and Wong. We can then assign a security role to this new team, which is now linked to our Entra ID security group. We can then rest assured that our three members that exist within that security group on Entra ID inherit this role through our Entra ID team, and therefore can access data within our environment accordingly based on these roles. So we can ensure that we're not assigning these security roles directly to a user, but we're governing it through Entra ID teams, which is then driven by Azure AD, Entra ID security groups, Office 365 groups. And we're going to touch on this a lot later as well, to how far we can go with using Entra ID teams. They're really, really phenomenal. But if we just look at the simple structural process of how we use ownership teams, we've got 4 members over here that form part of an ownership team we created. That ownership team has got the security role of Avengers assigned to it, meaning now that all these 4 Avengers will inherit that security role. Oopsies, what did I just do? Sorry, my bad. I think I clicked. These 4 Avengers over here will inherit that security role. So now if Captain America were to create a record over here, and he were to assign it to this ownership team, all these members over here would now be able to view that record. Now, if we were to visualize how Entra ID security groups work with teams, this is again one of my favorite ones, we could have a security group for our Avengers team, we could have one for our Sorcerers team, or for our Shield team. Now we can create this on a core business unit level, so our MCU business unit level. We can create it on a child business unit level, which is what we've done over here. Oh, sorry, I've got something in my throat. Please excuse me. And the users that are part of that Entra ID security group, part of that business unit, would then inherit that security role. Now, I want to come back to this this diagram, whatever you want to call it, a bit later on when we touch base on security roles, because there are some really big frustrations around security roles, and we'll see how this type of infrastructure using Entra ID security groups with security role inheritance really helps overcome those issues. So if we park this for a second and we kind of touch base onto our security roles, the third of our triple threat, we've kind of got 2 types of security roles when it comes to Power Platform. We've got our security roles that apply to non-Dataverse enabled environments, and security roles that apply to our Dataverse enabled environments. So I've just taken 2 from each for now, the roles that we commonly use. Our top 2, called our environment maker and environment admin, these are security roles that belong to an environment that are not Dataverse enabled. And these roles basically say, as a user, if I've got this role assigned to me, I can create canvas apps, I can create cloud flows, I can create connectors, I can create data flows and gateways if I needed to, and I can create solutions. But note how we've got no access to Dataverse, and that's because we don't have a Dataverse instance in this environment. Whereas if we look at some of our other roles, our last 2, our system customizer and system admin, these are probably roles that we're more familiar with a Dataverse enabled environment. And these are probably amongst the other couple of dozens of security roles that you see on a daily basis, such as the approvals user, your basic user, your card user, all those security roles that you can interact with. And again, similar to our environment maker, our system admin has got access to create canvas apps, cloud flows, manage environments, but we also can now create Dataverse tables to interact with Dataverse data, create various standard tables, virtual tables, whatever you need to create. You've got full control over that. And these 2 roles then spanning into those dozens of other roles that I just mentioned, we can then start assigning privileges to a lot more detail with a Dataverse enabled environment to say, okay, you've got this system customizer role. What do you want it to do? I want access to these tables within this role. I want to be able to create data. I want to be able to edit data on these various privilege levels. And that's where we get into a very, very important concept. And this is not just Power Platform specific. It's whether you're building a security model in any platform, be it SAP, be it Salesforce. It's called the principle of least privilege. And the idea of the principle of least privilege is to lock up data as much as you can from the start. So you want to ensure that your data is locked up and no one can gain access to that. Once you start finding the need to grant access to that data, you start creating minimal permission, so a security role here and there to say, okay, this security role can only access this part of data and that part of data. And you start spreading those roles out as you need to. And that's kind of why I like the word granular, is you can use security roles on top of each other to say, okay, this security role's got access to this table and this one's got access to that table. Let's merge them together. And they don't overwrite each other. They kind of work cohesively. So if you've got two security roles assigned to you with access to different tables, you don't get either or, you get both. You inherit both of those security roles. But it ensures that we've locked up our data as much as possible so we don't potentially have data breaches. And as we need to start letting out privileges, we do that through additional security roles. And the way I really like to visualize it, it's a very, very silly way of doing it. But there was this game that we used to play as kids called Tumbling Monkeys. I'm not sure if this rings any bells for anyone. But I like to think of the monkeys as data and the little rods that you stick through the tree as our security roles. Now, the point of the game is at the start, you want to stick all the rods through so you don't have any monkeys falling through. So you put all the rods in, you put the monkeys in on top, they start to trickle down, but none of the monkeys fall out from the tree yet. And that's how tight we want to lock up our data from the start of our security journey. As we need to start letting data out based on our security roles to different users, we start picking out these little sticks from our tree and monkeys start falling through. And eventually we'll be left with those sticks and all our monkeys will be out. But again, those monkeys will then be assigned to different areas of where those sticks belong. So we'll make sure that our data is tied up as much as possible and only data is released on a need-to-need basis. Now, if we dive into how a Dataverse-enabled security role actually looks like, let's take a look at the tables we touched at the beginning of the session with our heroes table, our weapons table, and our threats table. This is just a really, really big hypothetical security role called our hero security role. We'll refer to it later as our Avengers security role. Basically, this represents our security role editor in our Power Platform. Now, the one thing I've recently noticed is that when you edit a security role through the modern UI, it now defaults you to the modern interface, which I do not like. I really like the classic UI for security roles, much easier to use. But anyways, that's just me being frustrated. If we read through the security role and try to understand it, we can see that for our heroes table, a member that's assigned to the security role will not have any privileges to create, write, delete, assign, or share records to this table. So if, say, Falcon all the way over here were assigned this role, he wouldn't be able to create additional heroes in this table. But he would, however, have access to read across all business units, across the entire organization. So he'd be able to see all the heroes in this table if he needed to, but he'd only be able to append and append to, i.e. use this record in relation to another record for heroes that belong to the same business unit that he falls under. So if he falls under, it's called the Midgard business unit, he'll only be able to, say, assign an Avenger to a threat, a hero to a threat that only belongs to the Midgard business unit. If we look at our weapons table, we've locked it up a bit further. We can see this is only on a user privilege basis, meaning that only a user can create their own record, they can delete their own record, and they can append their own record and share their own record. So again, if we look at our Doctor Strange scenario where he creates a record in the weapons table with the icon, but because he created that record, he becomes the owner of it, and only he can access that record. No one else can, unless you've got a security role that gives you higher privilege, or you're part of a ownership team that gives you access to that record as well. So this is a classic example of only the Avenger can yield their weapon. When it comes to threats, we're locking it up to a business unit level, so only users within a business unit can create, read, and edit their threats, and they can append and append to their threats as well. So again, if we look at Falcon, he forms part of the Midgard business unit. He can only create threats in his business unit. He wouldn't be able to create threats in the Dynasty business unit. And then lastly, this is just a complete disregard for human property. Avengers don't care about warships. They just steal whatever they want and they crash them. So they've got full org privileges to add new ships to inventory, to use them, to delete them, crash them, to append to, etc. Which means they can just do what they want with those records. Now, if we look at our threats table over here on a business unit level and consider a practical example, we've got our 3 business unit structures over here. We've got our Midgard, our Asgard, and our Andromeda. Within our Midgard business unit, we've got 4 users. We've got Iron Man, we've got War Machine, Hulk, and Spider-Man. We've then got Thor in Asgard, and then you've got the Guardians of the Galaxy team in the Andromeda one. If we were to create a threat, or if Iron Man were to be able to create a threat in the Midgard business unit, all our users over here, War Machine, Hulk, Spider-Man, Iron Man, they'll all be able to see that threat because it belongs to the Midgard business unit. If Thor, again, were to hold the exact same role that we just looked at now, he wouldn't be able to see that threat that Iron Man created because, again, he's part of the Asgard business unit, and the record that was just created belongs to Midgard, so he wouldn't have access on the org level unless he's got a security role that gives him privilege to that. And the same thing applies with our Andromeda business unit. Users within that business unit that hold the security role that we've just been through will not have access to this record that Iron Man just created. Now, if we just take a little peek again at the exact same security role, just to focus on the weapons table, we can very clearly see it's on a user privilege basis. So taking that exact same concept into principle over here, we will look at our weapons table. Say Thor owns his own hammer and is part of the Asgard business unit. If we were to enable modernized business units, meaning that users can have data across different business units, fantastic. That's another discussion for another time. But Thor owns his record. It belongs to the Asgard business unit. So when we look at our record for our hammer, it says Thor's the owner and Asgard's the only business unit. If he were to share that record with, say, Captain America within the Asgard business unit, even though our security role says it's on a user basis, because we've shared the record, Captain America would then be able to yield that weapon that Thor owns. So it's pretty straightforward to kind of visualize it like that. Users can only access their own data unless it's shared out or unless it's part of an ownership or an access key. Just to mess things around even more, we've got one last security role called our Shield security role. This will be assigned to our Shield director, Nick Fury, but it's slightly different, as you can see. Nick Fury's got the ability to add as many people as he wants to our heroes table. He can remove Avengers, he can add them, he can share them, he can assign them, he can append them, whatever he needs to do. But he cannot yield any weapons. He just uses his fists. He doesn't have access to the weapons table. He just doesn't like fighting. So forget about any access there. He fortunately controls the Shield playbook, so that ensures that he can control all threats coming into the MCU business unit. He can create them, he can edit them, he can assign Avengers to them to go tackle them, so he's got full control. But he's got a bit more respect for property, so he only uses his own private ship and he doesn't share his ship with anyone else. Pretty straightforward. Now we've kind of touched on our security roles. One of the biggest downfalls I find with security roles is that if we look at the role table in Dataverse, you'll notice that, say, let's use our event one. Let's go back 2 slides. Over here, there we go. Let's go back 2 slides. Let's look at our hero security role. When we create a security role in our environment, it cascades per business unit. So if we have got, for example, 3 business units plus our core business unit over here, in our security roles table, we'll have this record 4 times, but it will be owned by each individual business unit. So it will be owned 4 times by different business units. And it becomes quite frustrating because if we start to manage security roles through our admin center, where we manually assign a role to an individual, when we assign that security role to them, Power Platform becomes smart enough to say, okay, we're assigning them this security role that belongs to their business unit. So if we were to assign the hero security role to Iron Man, for example, that forms part of the Midgard business unit, and we were to do that through the admin center, the security role association through record association that would occur would be the security role that is owned by the Midgard business unit. Now, the frustration comes in with what happens if I'm in with to change business units. Well, if you were to change business unit, that association would break. So if you were to move over to the Asgard business unit, because the association was made to a security role on a business unit level, we'd have to actually re-implement IMN security role manually through the admin center again, which is kind of frustrating because if you're managing thousands of users and you're moving people between business units, you've got different divisions and you want to kind of streamline things. It becomes a bit of an admin nightmare to ensure, okay, when a user moves, I've got to reassign them all the security roles manually. I need to remember what roles they had. Not so much fun. And that's why I really like the concept of teams with Entra ID. Remember, I said I was going to come back to this slide. Is when it comes to team that's linked to a security group on our core business unit, i.e. our MCU business unit, and we assign the security roles to a team, the users inherit that security role, but they inherit it automatically based on the business unit that they belong to. So we could have we can have 3 users part of different business units, but all part of the same security group for the Avengers. And because we've got the core security role Avengers assigned to that team, Power Platform is smart enough to know, okay, well, this user is going to inherit the security role part of this business unit. This user is going to inherit this role part of that business unit, etc. And when we do change a user's business unit, we just need to give it an hour, maybe less, to re-provision and say, okay, well, the Dataverse team, which is linked to Entra ID, will re-provision and ensure that that user is assigned to the appropriate security group based on their business unit. So it takes away the need for having to manually assign security roles when we switch business units, and it helps ensure that optimization and that efficiency with managing teams and control and security layers is really at its finest. So that's why I really, really like Entra ID teams. Fantastic. And that kind of closes our security role concept and bringing the idea of our triple threat to an end. If we use business units, teams, and security roles together, we start to build a really, really strong security model and foundation to extend on. We're streamlining users through Entra ID to business units to security roles. It's a really good start. We can then extend our security model onto hierarchies. And as I mentioned before, hierarchy is very similar to what you see in Microsoft Teams when you click on a user and check the organizational chart. We want to use the same concept, but on a security layer. So hierarchy models are configured per environment. It's based off the system user table. And unfortunately, it's not AAD driven, which is something I'll explain shortly. One of the benefits about hierarchy models is that you can set its access depth. Again, we'll see how these levels work in the next couple of slides. But basically, we can say what is an access depth? If a user owns a record, that depth level is equal to 0. And their direct manager above them would be level 1. And the manager above that direct manager would be 2. So you can see how far up this hierarchy ladder you want to go to start letting data through. That's what we call our access depth. What's also really nice about hierarchy models is that we can assign specific tables within our hierarchy model. So you can say only custom tables that I select want to have the hierarchy models enabled for it. And on our standard tables, it doesn't apply. When it comes to creating hierarchy models, we've got 2 different types of hierarchy models we can choose from. It's not I want both. It's an either or. It's a either or, unfortunately. I find that to be terribly frustrating that we can't enable both. But anyways, we've got our manager hierarchy model and our position hierarchy model. I think in the names, they're very self-explanatory with what they do. Basically, your manager can see your records and the person above your position role can see your records. But again, as I said, they're based on the system user table within an environment. And when I said it's not AAD driven, I mean that when you look at Office 365 and you look at that Teams organogram, you can see your job title there. You can see who you report to. It's all based on Entra ID Office 365, who your manager is, what your position is. Because this is based on the user table per environment, there is no association between a user's role or manager from AAD, which is very, very annoying, because if you're dealing with an environment with thousands of users and you've already set up your organogram nicely in Entra ID, it's a bloody nightmare to replicate that now in the user table to enable hierarchy models. So if you know of any way to auto sync, like a little button or an option to enable an auto sync AAD managers and positions to our user table, please let me know, because that would have saved me hours of work, and I'll praise you forever. The only way that I've found so far is to create a flow, and I call the users from our user table. I've then got the Azure object ID. We query them from Office 365. We get their manager, and then I just update them in the manager table with their position in the position column there. That's how I've done it so far. It's an initial bulk import, but it becomes very difficult to maintain. What's the source of truth? Is it our users table, or is it Entra ID? But if we look at our manager hierarchy model, as we explained, if a user were to create a record, their direct manager would then be able to view that record. What's also nice is there's some really, really nice validation within these models. So you can't create a hierarchy loop. If we were to say create a user called Hulk, and he would report to Iron Man, and Iron Man would report to Nick Fury. If we were to say Nick Fury were now to report to Hulk, Power Platform would throw a very nice little error saying you've created a hierarchy loop. And that applies to our position model as well. Our position hierarchy model is slightly different. It's also based on the user table, but there's also a middleman table called our position table. And we can basically define our positions in this table. We can define, call it the Avenger, and we can select, is it going to be a parent position? Is it not going to be a parent position? And we can start building up that hierarchy. So if we create Avengers Captain, we can assign the Avengers position saying, okay, what is your parent position? It's called the Avengers Captain. And then in our users table, we assign a position to a specific user. So again, these build up that hierarchy model similar to Teams, but in Dataverse. There's a nice visualization as well between the Dynamics 365 one and the Power Platform one. There's a variance of displays now, which is quite interesting. But it shows you a very nice organogram based on these structures. So if we were to look at a hierarchy model such as this, a quick pause. I'd say 50% of my time spent on this presentation was getting all of these little Lego icons off the internet. Ironically, you had to search for them individually and remove the backgrounds from them individually, which was an absolute nightmare. So if anyone ever wants to use some of these icons, let me know. I've got a repository of around 100 of them now. So reach out, they're all yours. But it took me quite some time to build up this kind of organogram based on our hierarchy models. It looked quite messy. I needed to bring all of it onto one page, but it's pretty straightforward. It's 3 levels. We've got Nick Fury sitting at the top. We've got Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and the Guardians of the Galaxy Captain sitting on top. I've gone blank on his name, Star-Lord. That's level 2. And then we've got a team of people per adventure captain, etc. So Iron Man, Hulk, and War Machine fall under Iron Man. Did I say Iron Man or Spider-Man? Sorry. What's his name? Ant-Man, Falcon, and Black Widow fall under Captain America, and so forth. I haven't included business units over here because I'm trying to avoid that for now. But if we were to say implement a manager hierarchy model based on, call it Captain America and Iron Man, we'll look at it like this. We've got Nick Fury sitting at the top. We've got Captain America and Iron Man sitting on level 1, and then we've got our individual users sitting on level 0. If War Machine over here were to create a record, let's call it our weapon, which, as we remember, is user-owned. If you were to create a new weapon and add it to the table, because Iron Man is his direct manager, Iron Man would have access to edit, read, write that record as well. And that's setting our depth level on our hierarchy model to 1. If we set it to 0, it means, okay, only War Machine can access that. No managers above him can access that. If we set it to 1, Iron Man can then interact with that record fully. If we were to set it to 2, for example, then the line manager above the direct manager would then also be able to view the record. So Nick Fury would be able to view War Machine's record that I created, but he'd only be able to view it. He wouldn't be able to edit it, reassign it, share it, etc. And we can start seeing how this depth level can start scaling up and up and up a hierarchy ladder. We can set it to 3, 4, 5. They'll have view permissions, and it's really, really convenient when you need to share data across a chain without having to create manager-specific security roles. Now, if we look at our position hierarchy model, it follows a very, very similar concept. We've got the exact same organogram structure where we've got Nick Fury at the top, we've got Captain America and Iron Man in the middle, and then each individual user at the bottom. But now, because we're using our position hierarchy model and not managers, again, it works at the same depth level, but all these users over here, such as War Machine, Hulk, Iron Man, they all assigned an Avengers position. And ironically, that position reports to the Avengers captain position, which is what Captain America and Iron Man hold. So if War Machine were to create a record that he then owns, because we've enabled the position hierarchy model with an access depth level of 2, the positions directly above War Machine, being our Avengers captain position, would be able to interact with that record. So we can see now both Captain America and Iron Man can edit the record, they can view it, they can interact with it, share it, etc. But again, because we've set our depth level to 2, our director, Nick Fury, will be able to view that record only, not share it, not interact with it, etc., only view it. Now that we've kind of gone over record ownership hierarchy models, what's the end game over here? The reason I put the Lego little hand over here is I'm dying to get this little Lego set. I've got the gold one, the Thanos one. I just want the Iron Man one. But anyways, that's a little nerdy side of me. We mentioned at the beginning of the session that when it comes to building security models and RBAC models, if you Google them online, you kind of presented with some really scary process diagrams with processes flying all over the place. We've got different services running all over. We've got different actions that can be slightly terrifying and confusing. But from the session that we've just been through now, with the fundamentals of each of these security concepts, we can build a really, really robust security model relatively quickly. And that's where we build what we call an RBAC model, role-based access control model. If we take it a step back and start on this side of the screen, we look at our users. This represents who we let into our environment, which is what we discussed already, our environment security group. We've now got users in an environment that we can actually do things with, we can assign data to. Fantastic. Now that you're in our environment, what type of privileges do you need? Okay, well, you're part of the Avengers security group in Entra ID, and that security group is linked to a Dataverse team. So now that you're a member of that security group, you now sync into that team, and because that team is assigned to a security role called the Avengers, you therefore inherit the security role to say you've only got that access to this data, you've only got privileges to do these type of functions. And because we've streamlined it through Dataverse teams now, we can say, okay, well, this security role that you're assigned to, you can inherit the role to the business unit that you belong to. You don't have to manually assign the security roles to the individuals based on their business unit. They inherit the role that they're assigned to based on their business unit, and they can only then see data within their business unit. So that's the start of a really good RBAC model, really simple one as well, on how we can get users to see basic data through this process. But we can extend that now even further through our hierarchy model that we've just been through. So now if we've got our users seeing data with security roles based on their business units, we can then feed that over here into our hierarchy model. And that's where this diagram comes into play. We've got, again, our business units on the 3 sides over here. We've got Midgard, the Dynasty, and Andromeda. We've got our organogram representing Nick Fury at the top. We've got Iron Man, Doctor Strange, and Star-Lord sitting in the middle, and all the individual users, the Avengers, sitting at the bottom. Now, the security role that they've all inherited through our Dataverse team assignment is our user level privilege on the threats table. Remember, sorry, not the threats table, the weapons table. They can only see records that they own. But now through the hierarchy model, we can say, great, we don't have to go create a new manager security role for managers to see this data, because if you're dealing with a company with thousands of users, how on earth do you control who's managing who? You could have many, many different depths of that hierarchy infrastructure. So through this hierarchy model, we can say, fantastic, even though I've got a user level privilege, because I'm the direct manager for one of these individuals, I can then see that data. So we can now see the record has got a green line saying the user above them can now access that data. And same thing with data created on this level. If Iron Man were to create a record and he were to have the user privilege assigned to him, because Nick Fury is his direct manager, Nick Fury will be able to then interact with that record as well. And that's what our green arrows represent over here. Whereas our yellow arrows represent viewing only, because we're skipping the direct manager. So for a record over here that War Machine created, yes, Iron Man can see it, interact with it, and deal with it directly. But because our depth level is set to 2, and Nick Fury can only view it, that's what our yellow line represents. He can only view the record. And lastly, if Nick Fury were to create a record, or vice versa, Iron Man were to create a record, because their subordinates below them, they wouldn't be able to view that record. Again, it's a user privilege, etc. So that's how we can bring the 6 fundamentals. I like to say the 6 fundamentals. There's so many more fundamentals of Power Platform security, and start really building a streamlined and efficient, optimized security model that then feeds into the rest of the Power Platforms, such as Power Apps, Power Automate. If you've got your data model right and your security roles right within Dataverse, you don't have to worry too much about enabling custom security controls within a Canvas app, saying if this user has got access to this and show this field, etc. You can rest assured that the data filtering through to those apps, whether it be a model-driven Canvas, Power Automate, the data coming through is very restricted based on the user logging into the environment. The thing that I like to end off with, and this is something I ended off with at the Scottish user group because it was at the Poetry Club. So I thought it'd be appropriate to put a poem in, and this was challenged by the amazing Nathan Rose. But basically, in the realms where data flows secure and strong, business units guard us all day long. Security roles define what each can see. Dataverse teams work in harmony. Hierarchy models pass power down, ensuring data is safe without a frown. And that brings us to the end of today's session. It's been an absolute pleasure sharing this idea of security with you guys. I don't foresee myself as a security expert. One of the reasons why I like talking about security is I had to learn it for a project that I was working on. And I find the best way to learn is to practice it and talk about it. So I use these sessions as my archive in a way to say, okay, I've learned this. Let's share it with people and let me remember what I've learned and continue learning. So if you've got any other ways of doing security models, any way of optimizing it, especially the syncing the manager hierarchy model to Azure AD, let me know, reach out. You can scan my QR code there, get in touch with me. I love engaging with the community. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a privilege.
Thank you so much, Nati. So it was an interesting topic and I use it a lot. So I think it's give actually a very good perspective to people, actually a solution architect who design, the security in the Power Platform. So I think it was a best practice and, the hierarchy model. So it was great. Thank you so much for this session today. So I'm not seeing any comments also and the question here in the chat. So thank you everyone to join us today. So hopefully you enjoyed the session and actually got the most of this from this session. So hopefully we have Nati in our other, upcoming in the futures actually session in the Power Platform 0 to Hero. And stay tuned with us in the June. So we have actually, let me share here. We line up. Sorry, where is that? It's here. Okay. So we line up our June session with the Power Platform. We have great topic around the AI, around the model-driven apps, around the how to automate your IT service requests using Power Automate and M365 Azure, and also drill into the Power Automate's new process mining feature. So we have outstanding speakers for the June as well, and hopefully to see you again on our June session. It will be on every Saturday, start from the June 8th. See you soon and have a good day. Thank you. Bye. Bye.